Hello, this is John Solomon with Cyber Club London. I'm here with Seth Kirschner, AppSec lead for DoubleVerify from New York, in the latest of our video series presenting the Cyber Club London's members. For those of you who are not familiar with us, CCL is a loose group of currently must be about 70 CISOs, senior information security managers, and other highly experienced InfoSec and cybersecurity leaders and experts around the world. We evaluate primarily early stage startups for investment, and we invest as a very loosely knit consortium. We also provide a lot of mentoring and guidance to the startups that we invest in. And this is part of a series of videos that not only aims to address companies in our investment portfolio, but also provide some guidance and some comments and opinions from a very, very broad range of very experienced security people to entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and other investors, customers, and general stakeholders in the cybersecurity innovation space. So Seth, maybe if you want to quickly say 2-3 words about yourself before we get started.
Yep, and thank you so much for having me, John. Really appreciative to be part of CCL and the larger community. As mentioned, I'm the AppSec manager for DoubleVerify. We're a publicly traded ad tech company. We operate at a global scale. I have hundreds of developers across the world that I work with on a day-to-day basis, and I help protect our organization's applications. So thanks again.
Excellent. So I'll lead right off. I don't really have any stock questions, and I'm just doing these very informally and fluidly. When you've joined a couple of the CCL evaluation calls, what are some of the main things that you see from startups that present to us that influence your opinion? What are the very, very first things that give you an impression, whether it's when you're doing your homework with the materials they send or during the actual presentation, that immediately give you a psychological positive or negative impression?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So I think for me, the initial factor that I look at, especially with a very early stage seed or pre-seed sort of startup, is predominantly looking at the founders. Are they repeat founders? Do they have experience launching a startup previously? Were they part of a startup that was a successful company and ultimately exited or were acquired in some fashion? And then not only that, secondly, do they have deep technical knowledge? And I think especially in the cybersecurity space, those two combinations of being a strong startup founder, especially a repeat founder, and having deep technical knowledge makes a really good opportunity initially for investment. Most likely because, let's say their initial proof of concept doesn't really go as well as they think. They're technically sound enough to be able to pivot the company in a strategic way upon getting a Series A or B investment.
Do you work in your professional function? Do you guys work with any kind of earlier stage startups? And I ask this because I come from primarily a large company environment where there's often a lot of reluctance to work with unproven technologies, and as silly as it is, people prefer to buy the safer option later on for a lot more money. So in your situation, is that something that you would consider, even if it's something that's not yet proven?
Yeah, I think coming from an enterprise point of view, there's a couple considerations that differ from that of you're another startup and you're a little bit more lenient. So unfortunately or fortunately, we do have a sort of robust third-party risk management and vendor management process. And so in many cases, especially if a tool isn't necessarily open source, then they'll have to at least complete some of those initial onboarding, which can pose a challenge. That being said, we still operate very much like a startup here at DoubleVerify. And so in many cases, we also love partnering with early stage startups, and we do that on a regular basis as long as they can make it through our sort of vendor onboarding process.
So you're looking at not only are the investors actually doing their due diligence, but you do your own in that case. That makes sense. For you, we're seeing a lot of the companies that present to us they talk about very familiar topics and very similar topics. And on the one hand, you have, things like SaaS, cloud, et cetera, which are obviously growing concerns and growing issues and growing industries. AI comes up a lot. On the other hand, you have, the IT buzzword itis. It's been around for as long as the industry's existed. So what, in your experience, are some of the very real trends and concerns that you think innovators should address in the coming years?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think from my point of view, one of the key areas that we've been focusing on, not only as Double Verify, but I think as an AppSec and sort of cloud security industry, is understanding code to cloud a little bit better. So when a developer initially commits code to, for example, is it running in some sort of container or containerized environment and then being deployed to a public cloud or CSP? And I think in many cases today, we don't really have a good picture of tying that information and data together. And so what we have is disparate sources providing vulnerability details in code, but then you don't actually know if it's being deployed into a production environment. You don't know potentially if it's externally facing or what the criticality of the data is. And so being able to take together various different vulnerability sources and data security sources and application security sources and your penetration tests, and sort of figuring out how do you look at it from each stage of your SDLC or development lifecycle, and then be able to prioritize and correlate the data from those various components, utilizing either one or several different tools to be able to visualize your attack surface a little bit more, a little bit better.
All right. And, on the topic of buzzwords, I mean, what are some of the concepts that you found in the presentations that we have that may be thoroughly legitimate, but that immediately make you a little bit cautious because they are such commonly used buzzwords? For me, it's AI, it's dashboard, it's things like that. What are kind of where does a startup have to be very careful to make sure that they show clear, unique value, rather than to get around this idea of wow, they're just regurgitating commonly used phrases today?
It's a really good point of view. I think one of the scariest topics for me is auto remediation. I feel like a lot of companies use it in various different contexts, but I think in practicality, it's completely useless. And the reason being is because you don't want a machine automatically fixing something without human input. And maybe in 3 to 5 years from now, the industry or some companies, especially larger enterprises, will be at a maturity point where they can handle something like that. But I think if you're in a environment that might have some fragile components that go along with it, auto deploying changes on your behalf without humans being able to review what's being deployed at a cadence and scale that's quite large, I think is a really scary concept. And so, for example, like a lot of infrastructure as code, like auto remediation tools that are in the market or that are pitched to us or something similar, or auto remediated package managers. These are the types of things that would really drive me personally crazy, because I think the reality is you don't know how much more damage those auto remediation options are going to provide than help. And I think a lot of tools in the market, whether they're growth-based startups or early stage startups, try to sell this as like a really big value add. But the reality is, from a usability point of view, it's a really small piece that you might only use in like a sandbox testing or development environment.
Or as a crutch, I guess, for human review. I wonder whether I see this as well. I get your point. I wonder whether some of that or a lot of that is driven by the enthusiasm of very technology focused people rather than, risk management or business requirements focus. So that's a topic that's come up in other conversations with CCL members. One question I like to ask is when you're seeing a startup presentation, what's an immediate turnoff? What's the worst thing that you've seen companies do? The same as having spelling mistakes in your CV, resume, that kind of thing. What's very easy to solve, and what should startups absolutely avoid when pitching?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. One of the initial pieces that I try to avoid is when a company is coming at a seed or pre-seed stage, and then they have these like very accurate financial forecasts that are included, and they're like, in 6 months, we're going to have 100K ARR. And then in 2 years, we're going to have 3 million in ARR. Because the reality is that at that stage of the company is extremely difficult to predict. And if someone knows, for example, that they're going to be able to hit those milestones when they're that early on in a company, I think that they'll have a grueling awakening in the near future that's going to hit them. So for me, it's always, it's okay to have projections as long as they're very loose in nature. And if you have really good data to support those projections, then it's helpful. But if you're just going to throw some numbers on a screen and be like, look, in 10 years, here's a little hockey puck, and you're just going to see us explode and have great, financials, I think the reality is you're too early of a startup to be able to see that the future.
I want to qualify that. For all the startups out there listening to this, I beg you, have some financials in your preparatory materials at least. I want to echo what you said. I mean, revenue predictions are okay, but be realistic about the precision. Yeah, we've seen some pretty nonsensical ones, but it shows if you have something approximate, I guess it shows that you've at least thought about the topic, which please do that. And I guess to wrap up, what's one, this sounds like, this sounds a very, very, very silly question, but what is one piece of advice, given your, long background and knowledge doing this, that you would give, what's the one must remember thing for a startup crew that's pitching that you would give them?
I would say one key takeaway is know your audience. At the end of the day, who you're pitching to makes such an important difference in what type of pitch you give or what context you provide. And so the reality is oftentimes, for example, if you're on a call with a bunch of technical stakeholders and these people are industry subject matter experts, you don't want to go in with your generic sales pitch and your sales engineers and your business development reps. You want to come in with your more technical resources in order to provide context to the problem that you're solving and make it relatable to the audience that you have in front of you.
Thank you for that. That's a really good one. I completely echo that. With that, I want to wrap it up, and I want to thank you very, very much for your time today. Again, Seth, I'll put a link to all of the information that you allow me to share about yourself so people can find you. Please do give us a visit at cyberclub.london. Whether you're a startup or investor or a customer or generally somebody just interested in the topic itself, we'd love to hear from you. Check out our other videos from our other members, as well as some of our portfolio companies. And we hope to see you in the next one. Thanks again. Look forward to seeing you on the next evaluation call, Seth.
Thank you so much, John. Appreciate you having me today.
Take care.